Welcome to the Back 40 Feet, and today I'm going to talk about seed starting. And the big question, to seed or not to seed, that is the question. So this, in general, when we're talking about vegetable gardening, which will be easier to talk about, but flowers pretty much follow the same suit, is that you're either going to have plants that need to be started well in advance of putting in the ground, or you're going to have plants that want to be direct sown. So let's talk about direct sowing first. I've already mentioned that the soil temperature needs to be at a certain degree so that some plants will germinate. And a lot of times on the seed packet themselves, they would tell you what the recommended soil temperature would be for optimal germination. And having a soil thermometer in the ground, you could do a quick test on that, because although on beautiful sunny days when the outside temperature is really nice, it doesn't mean that the ground has warmed up yet. So doing a quick check on that so that you don't have a failure rate on your seeds. There are plants that prefer to be direct sown, that they just don't survive very well or like when they get transplanted out into the ground. And that's called transplant shock, that sometimes it can set plants back by weeks as they try to recover from the trauma of being pulled out of their seed tray and put into the ground, which may be colder than what they were growing in. So plants that prefer to be grown, specifically vegetable seeds that prefer to be started in the ground, would be the majority of your root vegetables. So that would be your carrots, your beets, turnips. They don't like to be disturbed. And the other category in general are your greens. So that would be your lettuces, kale, your collards, Swiss chard, spinach. So these would be seeds that I would consider starting in the ground. In fact, that's what I usually do. The other plants in a different category, the ones that need to get started in advance, you'll see right there on the packet to sow indoors, and it usually gives you how many weeks prior to your last frost and when you should start them indoors. So if you look at tomatoes, peppers, eggplant as an example, those packets usually say 8 to 10 weeks before your last frost date. So what I always do is I have a calendar at the beginning of the year, and I start putting in the corners how many weeks I am away from the last frost date, so that I can kind of keep in mind when I really should be starting those seeds. I also, on the flip side, put how many weeks before the first frost. So if I wanted to plant seeds for fall harvest, it's easy to forget about it. You know, in the middle of August and September when the weather's gorgeous, you're just not thinking about, oh, I should probably put some lettuce or radishes in the ground. So by having it there on my calendar, it just is a reminder, a little situational awareness of when I should be putting seeds or plants in the ground. So the seeds that I'm talking about that you need to start indoors really require a fair amount of light to not only germinate, but they also need enough light to get strong, to grow, to survive the transplant outside. So these are not plants that I would start on a windowsill. There's just not enough light in the day that if you did do that, it's just going to be sad. The plants will get tall and then straggly and fall over, and it's just heartbreaking as a gardener to watch your plants not thrive. So you are going to start any of these plants indoors in a setup that has plant light, so that you can optimize how much sunlight that your plants get. Because even if you put them outdoors in like a greenhouse or a protected row cover, you're still reliant upon how much sunlight there currently is. And for the spring in New England, there's just not enough to have successful growth of these plants like the tomatoes. So I'm looking at my calendar now, and I see that we're 10 weeks before the last frost date. So this is a perfect time to be planting those 3 plants. There are some plants that require even longer than that, like celery recommends 10 to 12 weeks before your last frost date. Personally, I don't bother with celery. It takes up a lot of space in the garden. It is a long growing crop, and it still just tastes like celery. It doesn't have any huge differences if whether I grow it from my own seeds or not. So we still get to the question of, well, do I want to plant my own seeds or not? Or should I just go to the store and buy seedlings? So the advantage there is if you are new at gardening, or if you don't have a seed setup and you want to buy seedlings that require indoor starting, that they're already established and they're ready to go, and they should be pretty strong. And for that matter, you can also buy plants that would prefer direct sowing. You just need to know that they might get set back a few weeks. But at some of these gardening stores, these might have been started well before what the home gardener would have started, so that, you know, if you end up putting the plants back 2 or 3 weeks, it's really not going to make a huge difference on your harvest. But if we still go back to why would I start seeds in the first place if I can just go to the gardening store and pick them up? That's a valid question, and that's okay. You can certainly do that. I think it's just important to note that the stores, the gardening stores, their goal is to get you a reliable product that is going to survive most gardening experiences. So if you're new at gardening, great. But it doesn't mean that these are the tastiest of plants, or maybe it's not the plant that's best for your soil. So when I start from seed, I know that I can pick what I want for my soil type, the amount of rain that we get here, and the amount of sunlight, and also my palate, like what do I want to eat at the end of the day. And if it's an heirloom pepper or tomato, that's what I'm going to go for instead of, you know, some of the commercially grown plants. Another advantage for me is I am an organic gardener, and if I start from seed, I know that this plant has been grown organically from beginning to end to harvest. So to answer the question, to seed or not to seed, it's really going to depend on your experience and also what you have to support seed starting indoors. And if you can't start seeds indoors, to ask yourself, do you want to go ahead and start them outdoors for the plants that prefer direct sow? And that might be, you know, a good foray for your first attempts to start vegetables from seed if you haven't, if you don't have a lot of gardening experience. So that's all I have for now, and it's time to get started on my seeds.